Jessica, I have really something in my mind and curious about something really cool and rebellious, which is yung punk culture.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how cool? So, we've got punk history in the Philippines, right?
Yeah, pero I guess before we get ahead of ourselves, we should probably start with the basics.
Go ahead, Lex.
Alam mo ba, um, one of the sources na nabasa ko goes deep into the history of the punk in the Philippines. And let me tell you, it is super duper wild ride.
I know, right? Wild talaga, I bet. Especially during the Marcos regime.
For real, super intense talaga. Kasi di ba during that time, it wasn't just about the music. Parang it was a form of protest, a way to fight back against what was really going on.
Exactly. Imagine, you were living in the Philippines in the late 70s. Marcos is in power, the economy is a mess, and there's just this feeling of frustration and this disillusionment in the air. So punk rock, with its raw energy and in-your-face lyrics, it became this outlet for all of that.
Totoo, it is really not just about music. It's about rebellion, self-expression, and also a fight against an oppressive regime.
So ayun na nga, today, we'll see how punk rock in the Philippines became more than just a genre. So it evolved into a form of protest, a defiance against authority, and a force that continues to influence Filipino culture even today. So we'll talk about the bands, the DIY ethics, the fashion, and most importantly, yung impact ng subculture na to sa broader movement for change.
Yeah, the 1970s were really a time of immense hardship for Filipinos. Imagine living under the Marcos regime where martial law was declared and yung personal freedoms were taken away from you. And also, many were forced to live in fear. Hindi lang yan, parang yung government, they controlled the media, yung public speech was restricted, and literally, yung whole company, yung whole economy was literally in shambles. So, for the youth coming of age during this period, parang it is really dangerous to openly express dissatisfaction.
And add ko lang ha, it was in the suffocating environment that punk rock exploded onto the scene. So, nakarinig ka na ba ng punk music, Lex? Kasi there's something about the raw, aggressive sound of punk that matched the emotions people were feeling. Kasi diba that, during that time, Filipinos were angry, frustrated, and longing for change. Kaya we can say that punk wasn't just about loud music. It was a visceral reaction to the oppression that Filipinos were living under.
And you know what's fascinating is that Filipino rock and punk wasn't just a carbon copy of what was happening in places like the UK or the US. Given naman na yung bands were really inspired from Western punk acts, but they infused their music with Filipino experiences that addressed local political and social issues. So yung bands like The Jerks, The Dawn, and yung Urban Bandits become cultural touchstones because they used their platforms to fearlessly critique the Marcos dictatorship and also yung widespread corruption in the country.
Right, and these bands were writing their own songs directly challenging the political climate. Ang tapang so much, hands down talaga.
Real, hands down talaga. Alam mo yun, these bands were not afraid to sing about social injustice, dictatorship, and also yung struggles ng Filipinos. Parang yung music nila, they become a rallying cry for a generation that felt like they didn't have a voice.
Alam mo ba na one of the most iconic songs, which is yung Manila Girl by the Urban Bandits, it is a perfect example for this. Kasi sa una, it seems like a typical punk anthem. But if you dig a little deeper and you'll hear a biting commentary on the hardships faced by the working class in Manila, particularly the young women struggling to get by, the song was more than just a hit. It was an act of rebellion against the image of a beautiful Manila that the government was trying to promote.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Punk's influence went beyond the music.
You're talking about fashion, right? So let's be honest in here, Lex. Have you tried wearing ripped jeans? Because same. The ripped clothes, the safety pins, and the crazy hairstyles, that was all very deliberate, wasn't it? They were a bold rejection of the mainstream and a deliberate way to stand out, to say, we refuse to conform.
So guilty. I tried that because it was trending, yung ripped jeans era. But for the punks at that time, their fashion style was beyond fashion. It was a giant, sorry for the word, but it was a giant middle finger to the mainstream. It was like they were saying that we reject your standards of beauty, your expectation, and your whole system.
Absolutely. So these fashion choices were as much a part of the rebellion as the music. So there was a sociologist that called it an aesthetic of the ugly, and that's a great way to describe how Filipino punks use their appearance to challenge the status quo. Wearing ripped clothing, for example, symbolized their rejection of consumerism and material wealth, which were ideals that the Marcos government tried to promote despite yung paghihirap na pinagdadaanan ng mga Filipinos that time. Like extreme poverty talaga.
Which I think perfectly captures the spirit of rebellion that defines punk and that whole DIY ethos. Alam mo yun, Jessica, yung do it yourself. But it wasn't just do it yourself na you can literally do it by yourself. Sa kanila, it was a whole philosophy, di ba?
Yes, yes. It was about taking control, being self-reliant, and not relying on the establishment for anything, diba?
Yeah, and not to mention, bands were forming their own labels, producing their own records, and also creating their own fashion statements, literally from the scratch.
Exactly. It was really a rejection of consumerism and a celebration of individuality and doing things your own way. Literal na DIY, do it yourself.
I think that sense of community and independence really defined Filipino punk. It wasn't just about individual rebellion, it was about creating spaces where young people could come together, share ideas, and also feel a sense of belonging. In fact, meron nga silang parang these underground gigs which often held in a small, cramped venues but they were filled with energy and passion. Imagine yung scene, parang a packed, sweaty room, parang malapit na kayo magkapalitan ng mukha. But it is filled with people moshing to the music, shouting lyrics that were both cathartic and political. Di ba parang it wasn't just a concert, parang it was an act of defiance.
Yes, and even today, that legacy lives on. We see the echoes of Filipino punk in today's independent music scene, in DIY art collectives, and in the activism that continues to challenge authority. So the punk spirit of questioning the status quo, of standing up against injustice, is still very much alive in the Philippines. In fact, many of today's social movements continue to draw inspiration from the punk ethos, whether it's in street protest or in the use of art and music as tool for change.
You know, it's also interesting to think about how this punk spirit transcends generations. Yung mga young Filipino today may not have lived through martial law, but many of them are still dealing with issues like political corruption, poverty, and inequality. And punk rock, with its message of rebellion and resistance, continues to resonate. So bands are still using music to address contemporary issues, whether it is about workers' rights, environmental concerns, or even yung gender equality.
So it is a testament to the enduring power of music and subcultures as catalysts for social change. So whether you're a longtime fan of punk or someone just discovering it, remember that this music carries with it a history of resistance and a call to action. So for our listeners, the next time you listen to Filipino punk rock or any just punk music, huwag natin kalimutan yung stories behind it, the struggles, the defiance, and the voices that refuse to be silenced.
Exactly, punk is more than just a genre. It's a way of life, a philosophy, and a movement. And the Filipino punk scene reminds us that even in the darkest of times, creativity and rebellion can flourish, which gives people a voice when they need it the most.
So I hope this podcast inspires you, me, and all of our listeners, no whether through music, art, or activism, let's find our own way to challenge the world around us. Especially pag alam naman natin na we have something to fight for. Diba? Very makabayan. After all, punk reminds us that change often starts with a single voice, which is yours. So that is all for our podcast in today's episode. I hope you listened a lot, and we'll see you on our next one.